In the backroads of rural Maine, where dirt paths twist into a forgotten valley, there lies an abandoned apple orchard left to rot since the 1970s. The trees stand blackened and skeletal, their brittle branches clawing at the sky like the bones of something long dead. Waist-high weeds choke the ground, and the locals steer clear of the land. At night, between the rows of lifeless trees, a constant murmur drifts through the wind, like prayers swallowed before they can be heard. They say it's the voices of those who vanished there, never to return. Now Eleanor, a woman in her 50s, has come back to reclaim the land that once belonged to her family. Knee. By late afternoon, Eleanor pulled her car to a stop before the rusted gate of the old farm. She stood in silence, staring down the moss-choked path that disappeared into the shadows of the orchard. The two-story wooden house emerged from behind the trees, its roof sagging, windows shattered, the wind whistling through the broken glass like a trapped animal's cry. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her weight. The smell of mildew and decayed wood invaded her lungs. Beyond the house, the orchard stretched out like a vast graveyard. Hundreds of apple trees stood rigid and blackened, their brittle limbs reaching upward like skeletal hands frozen in prayer. Weeds strangled the roots, spilling across cracked furrows, obscuring the old paths. Yet, amid the desolation, Eleanor noticed something strange. A few branches shivered, leaves clattering together in a dry whisper. But there was no wind. Not even the faintest breath stirred the air. The sound grew sharper, rising like a chorus of murmurs carried from far away, before falling suddenly into silence. At the edge of the orchard, she saw a figure bent low at the base of a tree. A gardener, lean and mud-stained, moving with deliberate patience. He never lifted his head, never showed his face. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until the figure slipped behind a thicket and vanished, leaving only the raw emptiness of the ground behind. Turning back toward the house, Eleanor caught sight of another figure, a minister standing not far away. He paused only briefly, his eyes fixed on the orchard with a gaze that lingered like a warning left unspoken. Then he turned and drifted into the pale gray mist settling over the valley. Dusk drained the light from the sky, and Eleanor realized she was standing alone in the stillness. Not every tree here had withered. At the orchard's center, one apple tree towered above the rest, its leaves vivid, trembling under the last traces of daylight. It looked unnaturally alive, as though the entire orchard's stolen vitality had been poured into this single trunk. The sky collapsed into darkness. Eleanor felt the orchard behind her, vast and gaping, like a black mouth whispering for her to step inside. I'll many in the dark. A gray dawn bled across the fields, mist curling thick around the orchard, until it looked like a blurred silhouette suspended in silence. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, breathing in the damp chill, her eyes drawn once more to the single green tree at the center. Through the haze, its canopy glimmered with unnatural vitality, weighed down by countless swollen apples. She moved closer, her steps heavy on the wet earth. At the trunk, she realized these were no ordinary fruits. Their skins were misshapen, blistered, bulging with veins that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Some hung grotesquely large, as though something inside them strained to break free. Eleanor's body recoiled, but her gaze clung to the sight. One apple dropped. The sound was wrong, hollow, echoing like a shell cracking underfoot. Its skin split open, releasing a thick black ooze that spread across the soil. Inside, for an instant, something small and round gleamed, an eye, human in shape, curling in on itself before collapsing into nothing, leaving only a wet stain seeping into the ground. Eleanor clenched her fists, but dared not stoop closer. From deep within the orchard, the murmurs began again. This time clearer, layered with many voices breathing as one, whispering like a desperate prayer. The sound slithered through the brittle branches, coiling along the trunks until it wrapped itself around Eleanor. She felt it crowding her ears, as though unseen bodies had gathered at her side, whispering just beyond her sight. Though before her stood only the corpses of trees. Movement caught her eye. The gaunt gardener had returned, carrying an old wicker basket. He approached the thriving tree and stooped, gathering the twisted fruit as they fell, placing each one gently into the basket. His face remained hidden in shadow, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of his motions carried more of ritual than labor. When the basket filled, he turned and slipped into the rows of dead wood, vanishing without a trace, leaving an emptiness that felt colder than before. The sun climbed higher, but its pale light could not banish the chill. Eleanor retreated into the house, carrying a dread she could not yet name. That night, as she sat alone in the dark, a steady plop echoed from the orchard, the sound of apples striking the ground. They fell in rhythm, each thud mingling with the relentless whispers that threaded through the night, a dirge without end. Eleanor closed her eyes, but the sound clung to her. It crept into her dreams, a voice that did not speak to her, but through her, as if the orchard had found its way into her mind. Arthur. On the third night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The valley outside lay in absolute stillness, yet the curtain by her window stirred, as if touched by an unseen hand. In the dark, she heard it, a faint sound at first, like shallow breathing, which slowly unraveled into whispers. They weren't confined to the porch. They seeped into the room, coiling around her bed, slipping into her chest like smoke. She sat upright, her pulse pounding. From the window, the orchard stretched wide beneath the pale wash of moonlight. The dead trees stood rigid, skeletal silhouettes on guard. And in the center, the lone living tree shivered violently, its leaves trembling, though not a breath of wind stirred. The whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices woven together. Some words broke free, clear and sharp. They called her name. Familiar voices, voices she hadn't heard since childhood, voices long buried in memory. Eleanor descended the stairs, the rotted floorboards glowing faintly where the moonlight fell. When she opened the front door, a current of icy air wrapped around her, urging her toward the orchard. Each step sank into the damp earth with a dull, sucking thud, blending with the murmur that thickened around her. It no longer felt like sound. It clung to her, burrowing into her heartbeat, as if someone whispered directly into her ear. At the foot of the green tree, she froze. From its bark bled a viscous, tar-like sap, running down in glistening streaks. The soil beneath the roots pulsed, swelling, sinking, like the breath of something alive. The whispers swelled with it, rumbling through the ground, as though the orchard itself was one colossal, living body. Far off, in the shadows, something shifted. The gardener stood between two rows of withered trees, his narrow shoulders hunched. He didn't approach. He didn't vanish. He simply watched. His silent presence made Eleanor's skin crawl, but the voices at her ear tugged her back toward the roots. When she returned inside, a book waited on the table. Dust filmed the cover, its spine cracked and brittle, yet it lay open on a passage she knew she hadn't touched. Faded ink spelled out fragments, the forbidden fruit, the mingling of blood and soil, the feeding of souls. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't left this here. Outside, the whispers pressed against the window panes, hammering every word into her skull. The night stretched long. Eleanor sat awake, rigid, her ears straining. Footsteps circled the house, measured, deliberate. The tread was unmistakable. Her own footsteps, the exact rhythm she had taken through the orchard that afternoon, now played back to her, endlessly, tauntingly. Each time they ceased, the whispers surged louder, faster, more insistent, urging dial, waiting. By dawn, Eleanor slumped in her chair, her body hollow with exhaustion. But she knew the truth now. The orchard had found her. It would never release its call, and the whispers would not stop, not until she stepped deeper into its darkness. Okay. The day dragged on in a haze of exhaustion, yet Eleanor found herself unable to leave the house. Each time the thought of escape flickered through her mind, the whispers rose again, an invisible wall of sound pressing her back. She sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the orchard, watching the brittle branches twitch without cause. By nightfall, the fog rolled in heavy and thick, smothering the path. Moonlight washed the orchard in a pale glow, turning the trees into twisted pillars of bone. Heart pounding, Eleanor stepped into the mist. Her body trembled, but her feet carried her forward, deeper into the maze of dead rows stretching endlessly in every direction. The voices came clearer than ever before. Not just strangers now. Woven among them were the tones she knew by heart. Her father's stern voice, her mother's soft cadence, the faint laughter of her sister, long dead. The sound tangled around her, calling her name, flooding her mind with flickers of memory. Family dinners, warm hands once clasped, now nothing but dust. She shook, but her heart lurched toward them. At the orchard center, she stopped. From the fog emerged figures, blurred at first like vapor, then sharpening into faces. Her father's stern eyes, her mother in her faded dress, her sister with her hair cascading loose. They stood silent beneath the skeletal trees, their skin pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, their eyes bottomless, locked on Eleanor. She staggered back, but the faces did not fade. They drifted with her, step for step, yet no footfalls echoed on the ground. Only the whispers persisted, this time spilling from their closed mouths. Words without meaning tangled into a low, droning chant, warped and endless. In their midst, the lone green tree loomed, its twisted canopy alive with grotesque fruit. Apples glistened in the dark, shining like eyes. One dropped, rolling to Eleanor's feet. Its skin split open, revealing a child's smiling face before collapsing into a slick of black liquid that bled into the soil. The gardener appeared again. This time he was close, standing right beside the living tree. Moonlight carved his gaunt features into shadow and bone. His hollow sockets stared upward, while his thin hands clung to the bark. When his mouth opened, the same whispers poured out, merging seamlessly with the voices of the orchard, as if he too had become one of them. Eleanor realized she was sitting on the cold ground, though she couldn't remember lowering herself. The chill seeped through her dress, her trembling hands resting on her lap. Around her, the faces closed in, slowly leaning nearer, until the icy breath of their skin brushed hers. At the center, the tree quivered, its strange fruit trembling violently, as if feeding on her very presence. Above, clouds devoured the moon, plunging the orchard into suffocating dark. In that moment, Eleanor felt it. The orchard, inhaling, its breath filling her chest, exhaling in unison through her own lungs. The whispers roared in harmony, 1,000 voices braided into one. And for the first time, she understood. It was an invitation, a demand, a promise of reunion forever. And Adi, when dawn never came, the sky hung heavy, thick with a gray so dense it seemed to swallow the light itself. Eleanor sat motionless at the edge of the orchard, eyes locked on the lone green tree that pulsed with unnatural life. Around it, the dead trunks stood in their endless rows, but in the silence, she felt them waiting, as though each rotting vein of wood carried a faint, patient heartbeat. The faces emerged again through the fog. Not just her parents and sister now, but countless others. Strangers with hollow black eyes and sealed lips, their silence taut with demand. Yet, the whispers no longer came from them. They rose instead from the soil, from the roots, from the relentless pounding in Eleanor's chest. Her hand brushed the ground. The earth trembled, yielding soft and damp like living flesh. Beneath the grass, her fingers grazed sharp fragments, small bones, human teeth, rings tarnished with rust. The orchard was not merely dead, it had been fed. Every soul that vanished had seeped into its roots, its fruit, its endless murmurs. At the center, the green tree shuddered, convulsing with hunger. Apples cascaded to the ground, bursting open in wet cracks. Inside lay shreds of dark red tissue, scraps of shriveled skin. The air thickened with the stench of blood and rot, so heavy it clawed at the lungs. Eleanor swayed, her head swimming, yet her feet carried her closer. The faces leaned low, eyes burning with expectation, the circle closing in. They did not move, yet their silence pressed on her, an invisible weight driving her toward the tree. The whispers had become one sound now, a single, drawn-out note vibrating through her skull, a command, a summons to return to the source. She placed her hand on the trunk. The bark was cold, thrumming like a living pulse. In that instant, Eleanor felt herself unravel. Her breath, her blood, her very sense of self seeped downward into the veins beneath the soil. Darkness filled her vision, not with fear, but with a stillness so absolute it seemed to hum with hidden voices. By morning, the gardener stood among the trees, an empty basket in his hands. The green tree was heavy with fruit, its leaves lush, casting a cool shadow over the ground. There was no sign of Eleanor. Only the whispers remained, softer now, as though a new voice had been folded into their song. And from that day on, the orchard grew quieter than ever. But for those who dared to step close and listen long enough, there was always one more note in the chorus of the wind. Nilmende. My name is John, and I used to be an Uber Eats driver. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. On a frigid night, with heavy snow blanketing the streets, my phone screen flickered. A new order. The address was in a remote, secluded area, and the payout was double the usual fare. Just one more, I told myself, and then I'll go home. It wasn't just my last delivery. I drove through the snowy darkness, the only car on the desolate roads. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a large, dilapidated mansion. It stood isolated among bare, skeletal trees. A chilling feeling, not from the cold, but from something unseen, seeped into my bones. I saw a yellowed piece of paper taped to the front door, scrawled in what looked like dried blood were the words, "Do not knock. Leave the order at the garage gate. Do not look back. Leave immediately." I shivered but followed the instructions. As I placed the order at the garage, a man emerged from the shadows. He wore a dark coat and a hood that hid his face. He pointed to the package, then lunged and grabbed my wrist. "Follow me," he commanded. His hand was freezing, an icy grip that sent a jolt of terror through me. I pulled away and ran, not daring to look back. I jumped into my car and sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. I called the police immediately. They met me at the scene. After a brief investigation, an officer turned to me, his voice low. "That house has been abandoned for decades," he said. "There was a brutal murder there many years ago. A family was killed, and the perpetrator was never found." A mix of fear and curiosity welled up inside me. I had to go back. I needed to know the truth. It was an unexplainable pull, as if an invisible thread was drawing me back to that haunted house. I returned at midnight. Moonlight illuminated the shattered windows, like the empty eyes of a sleeping monster. I walked in, my footsteps echoing on the creaking wooden floorboards. The house wasn't a typical ruin. Things were strewn about, chairs were overturned. The front door slammed shut behind me. Then, a loud thud. A window I hadn't noticed was open suddenly slammed shut. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. From upstairs, I heard heavy footsteps. I spun around, but no one was there. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right behind me. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I ran into another room, where a dried blood stain was on the wall. I shined my light on it, and words appeared as if written just moments before. "Find the truth." Suddenly, an old television in the corner flickered to life. The screen was dark, then displayed the family photo from before. Their faces were distorted, their eyes pure white. In a panic, I turned to run, but the door was locked. Despair washed over me. The spirits of the murdered family appeared before me. They stared at me with empty, soulless eyes. A chilling whisper echoed through the room. A rope descended from the ceiling, and a noose tightened around my neck. I struggled, but it was no use. My flashlight fell from my hand, the final light of my life extinguishing as I collapsed to the floor. The next morning, my Uber car was found parked outside the mansion. But I was gone forever. No one knows what happened to me that night, or why I never returned. They say Christmas is a time for miracles, for warmth and togetherness. But for me, this Christmas was a curse. While my roommate was at a party, I chose to stay home. The loneliness on Christmas Eve should have been sad, but instead, it sent a shiver down my spine. To escape the feeling, I put on my coat and walked outside. Snow fell softly, blanketing the deserted streets. I went to the nearby park, where I saw a figure sitting silently on a bench. He was hunched over, his head hidden by a hood. He had no expression, no life in him, just a terrifying stillness. I just wanted to go home. But I didn't know that from that moment, he was following me, and Christmas Eve would become the worst nightmare of my life. When I got back to my apartment, I saw him standing right in front of the door. With no expression on his face, he just stared at me. Panicked, I rushed inside, slammed the door shut and locked it. My heart was pounding, but when I looked through the window, he was gone. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. I tried to calm myself, pulling out my phone to call the police. As I was talking, I looked out the window. He was still there, but this time, his face wasn't human. It was a featureless, black void. He picked up a stone and threw it hard at the window. The glass cracked. He kept throwing stones, each blow a dagger aimed at my sanity. He finally shattered the glass, and a boneless arm reached inside, gliding across the broken surface to write a message in the condensation. I'm already inside. I screamed and backed away. The police arrived, but they found no one. They looked at me with pity, saying I must have been frightened. They left, leaving me utterly alone with my fear. I sat in my room, staring at the shattered window. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through the silence. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from my bedroom door. I crept toward it, but no one was there. I went back to my desk, but the knocking returned, this time from inside my closet. I knew something was in the room with me. I bolted out of the room, running down the stairs. A cold hiss filled the air. I turned back and saw the faceless face. No eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth, staring at me through the window. "Follow me," a raspy voice whispered. It wasn't a sound, but a frequency trying to possess my mind. I screamed, a guttural sound of pure terror, and collapsed to the floor. The next morning, I was found in a state of catatonic shock. I was curled up in the corner, still clutching my phone. I couldn't speak, just stared blankly into space. The police returned. They found deep claw marks on the wall, but the shattered window was back to normal. Everything was as it was. I never returned to college. The horror of that Christmas Eve has stayed with me forever. The faceless man didn't kill me. He possessed my soul, leaving me an empty shell, just like him. And my story became a warning. Never be alone. And never believe what you see, because there are things that exist that you can't touch. Eerie, do. Within the abandoned asylum, rusted wires bite into effigies suspended in endless decay. Their hollow forms sway gently, as if lulled by a breath that no longer belongs to the living. When night falls, the silence fractures. The figures convulse, their heads twisting in unison to a broken funereal rhythm. Jonah pulled the car to a halt on the gravel road, where withered trees stretched their skeletal branches toward the ashen sky. Before him loomed the asylum, a corpse of concrete and steel, windows shattered, walls peeled and veined with moss. Clara stepped out, her old camera slung over her shoulder, eyes caught between curiosity and dread. They had heard the stories whispered 100 times before. Muffled cries echoing down the corridors, shadows dangling in broken windows, and always the same dreaded name, Dr. Harland. Jonah recounted to Clara the rumors of Harland's puppet therapy, drilling into skulls, wiring patients so their bodies could be made to dance. Many dismissed it as grotesque folklore, but others swore those experiments were the very reason the asylum was shuttered overnight. They pushed at the rust-eaten steel doors. Ingus screamed, the sound dragging down the hallway like metal tearing bone. Inside, The stench of ancient disinfectant mingled with mildew, as though the air itself had been trapped since the 60s. Clara lifted her camera, snapping shot after shot. Rusted bed frames, suffocating corridors, padded cells gone rotten with mold. Jonah led the way, jotting notes. Clara said nothing, only pressed her shutter again, as though afraid the building's truth might vanish if she didn't capture it fast enough. Darkness thickened as daylight drained from the high windows, swallowing the halls whole. They stopped at the threshold of the great auditorium, where a collapsed wooden stage waited under a ceiling of rusting beams. Jonah felt his own footsteps strike too loud, the echoes bouncing back as though someone unseen matched his pace. Clara drew in a breath, her lens trembling as she tilted it toward the rafters. A sudden flash erupted. For the briefest instant, Jonah glimpsed something. Someone suspended high above. Then blackness reclaimed it. He craned his neck upward, heart pounding, while the air grew heavier, pressing on his chest. From somewhere deep within the asylum came a sound, a drawn-out metallic screech, like strings being tested in the dark. Clara's whisper cracked the silence. "We're not the only ones here." Jonah flicked on his flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the dark. The light swept across the steel rafters above, and his breath caught. Shapes dangled from the beams. From a distance, they looked like patients in tattered hospital gowns, but their skin was gray, stiff, and lifeless as wood. Clara lowered her camera, hands trembling. She had managed one last shot before the flash revealed the horrific truth. One of the figures twitched, a hand jerking slightly, its neck bent at an unnatural angle as if yanked by invisible reins. Jonah swore every hollow eye socket had turned toward them. A chorus of metallic shrieks echoed overhead. The wires shuddered, pulling the hanging forms taut. Then they moved, not with the fluidity of the living, but stiff and jerky, like wooden marionettes forced to dance. Heads snapped in unison, arms lifted, legs curled, all to a rhythm only they could hear. Jonah staggered back against the wall, cold sweat breaking across his skin. He remembered the patient files he'd studied, rumors of skulls drilled open, wires fed into spines, bodies turned into living puppets. He had never believed it. Not until now. Clara clutched his arm, whispering, They're still being controlled, but by who?" A heavier movement drew their eyes upward. From the shattered stage at the far end of the hall, something massive was rising. It was no longer a man, but a grotesque fusion of steel cables, rotting wood, and clattering joints. A face patched together, half man, half puppet, hung above a hulking body. Jonah knew instantly who it was, Dr. Harland, or what remained of him. The giant puppet bent low, its elongated arms sweeping wide. When it yanked a lever of wire, every dangling patient screamed in unison, a cacophony of cracking wood, grinding joints, and rusted hinges shrieking. The sound drove Clara to her knees, hands clamped over her ears. Jonah tried to haul her up, his eyes locked on the advancing horde. From the rafters, wires slithered downward like roots, snaking toward the floor, carrying the stench of rust and blood. There was only one choice left: flee deeper into the asylum's maze, or be hoisted up as another lifeless puppet. Jonah gripped Clara's hand hard and shouted, "Run!" Their footsteps thundered down the corridor. chased by the mad symphony of shrieking wires and the wooden convulsions of puppets dancing to their unseen master's tune. Wah! The narrow corridor stretched into infinity. Every step Jonah and Clara took echoing like a death knell. The trembling beam of the flashlight swept across half-open iron doors, their nameplates faded with time. Room 12, Special Therapy, Room 23, Behavioral Experiments. Wind hissed through cracks in the walls, sounding like the labored breaths of invisible patients. Jonah ran, forcing his lungs into rhythm. In his mind, the asylum's cryptic notes spun in a vicious cycle. Marionette therapy, restoring willpower through external control. He had never believed anyone could be cruel enough to attempt such things. But now the truth dangled on wires behind them, swaying in pursuit. Clara halted, pointing to a door left ajar. The faint red lettering still lingered. Operating room. "Jonah, we have to look," she gasped. "There might be answers inside." Jonah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, but Clara's gaze, terrified yet unyielding, pulled him forward. Together, they shoved the door open. The operating room lay in darkness, save for a few dangling bulbs. One flickered to life with a sickly yellow glow, spotlighting the center table. There, shackled in place, lay the skeleton of a patient. Ribcage punctured, spine threaded with rusted wires. Clara lifted her camera and clicked. The flash burst across the back wall, unveiling a grotesque mosaic, dozens of sketches tacked side by side. Human bodies redrawn as puppets, their joints hinged with steel, every pencil stroke marking a drill wound. In the center hung the largest draft, its title scrawled in bold. Project Marionette, Total Control. Jonah's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, trembling fingers brushing the smeared ink. At the corner, a signature still lingered. Crooked, desperate, Harland, 1963. A sudden clang of metal jolted them. They spun around as the ceiling cracked, wires slithering downward to coil around the skeleton's limbs. The corpse jerked violently, then sat upright, jaw grinding with a splintering rasp. Dot. Clara screamed, while Jonah dragged her into the corner. The puppet corpse staggered forward, wires threaded through its eye sockets and chest, twitching with each unnatural step. Every footfall was the sound of wood splintering, every pull of the wires a discordant note. From the distance came a voice, low and rhythmic, like a conductor's count. 1, 2, 3. Jonah froze. Harland was orchestrating the entire asylum like a stage, each puppet moving to his cadence. He squeezed Clara's hand, eyes locked on the narrow exit across the room. "Run, when I say now." The puppet advanced, iron arm swinging down. Jonah zeised a rusted bar from the floor and swung upward, clashing against the blow. The screech of metal on metal shrieked through the room, sparks flying. In that instant, Clara dashed through the door, Jonah racing after her. They plunged into another corridor, leaving behind the relentless beat echoing through the asylum, louder, heavier, as if the building itself had a pulse. Jonah gasped for air, one truth burning inside him. Unless they destroyed the thing at the center of it all, they too would be dragged upward, to dangle among the others, lifeless marionettes swaying in Harland's grip. Nisai, never way. The metallic shrieks of the wires still trailed them, but Jonah was beginning to notice a pattern. The cadence, 1, 2, 3, echoed from deep within the asylum, steady as a war drum. Each time the rhythm quickened, the puppets they encountered in the corridors twitched awake, turning in unison toward them. "Clara," he whispered, "the sound guides them. If we follow it, we'll find where Harland is pulling the strings." Clara nodded, her face pale, but a spark of resolve flickered in her eyes. She clutched the camera as if it were the last weapon she had. They descended a rotting spiral staircase. Dust coated the steps, clawed with endless gouges where wires had scraped across the stone. Jonah's hand skimmed the damp brick wall, the chill sinking into his skin like a parasite. As they dropped another level, the beat grew clearer, merging with the taut whine of wires pulled too tight, like a violin tuned past breaking. At the bottom stood a massive iron door. 2 words were carved into its surface: Control Ward. It hung slightly ajar, and through the crack spilled a red glow, pulsing with every count of the rhythm. Jonah drew a sharp breath and pushed it open. Inside lay a circular chamber, its ceiling a high dome from which hundreds of wires dangled like metallic roots. Each tether fed into colossal gears that churned with a grinding tempo. And at the very center, enthroned upon a towering chair, sat the husk of Dr. Harland. His body was no longer whole. Half his face had rotted away, yet his eyes remained open, milky and unblinking. Wires pierced his ribs, spine, even the skull itself, latching him into the machinery. Each turn of the gears yanked his body in violent spasms, and with every jolt came the thunder of puppets shifting above. Clara covered her mouth, choking back a scream. Jonah could not look away. This was no mere mad doctor. Harland had transformed himself into the mechanical heart of the asylum, a grotesque puppeteer wired to his own stage. Suddenly, Harland's eyes swiveled, locking onto them. A voice rolled out, not from his mouth, but from every wire, reverberating through the chamber as though the building itself spoke. "The final audience has arrived." The wires shuddered, glowing red-hot. From the fissures in the walls, the patients emerged, dozens of them, shuffling forward. Wooden hands and iron limbs scraped across the floor, closing the circle. Jonah dragged Clara back toward the far corner. His mind raced. He couldn't fight this army. But if Harland was the center, destroying the machinery might end it all. "Clara, listen," he hissed, urgent. "We have to break the main gear. If it stops, everything stops with it." Clara swallowed hard, then nodded. She clutched the camera tighter, ready to hurl it if it meant shattering steel. The puppets advanced, the circle closing in. Harland's laughter rattled through the dome, blending with the screech of grinding gears, a death orchestra swelling to crescendo. Jonah tightened his grip on the rusted iron bar, eyes locked on the glowing heart of the machine. There was only one chance: to strike before the wires closed in, before they too were bound, suspended among the asylum's collection of lifeless marionettes. Wah! Jonah tightened his grip on the iron rod, his heart pounding like a war drum. The puppets closed in, their hollow eyes gleaming, wires shrieking as they strained. At the center, Harland convulsed with each grinding turn of the gears, half his ruined face curled into a grotesque smile. "The audience must join the final act," his voice echoed through the dome, drawn out like a warped lullaby. With a roar, Jonah charged the machine. The iron rod slammed into the blazing gear, sparks bursting in a violent spray. The mechanism shuddered, wires slackened, and the puppets staggered in confusion. Clara screamed his name, her eyes wide with terror. But Harland would not yield. Wires slashed down from the rafters, coiling around Jonah's arm, wrenching him into the grinding maw. His body jolted violently, blood streaking across steel, mingling with the pulsing red glow. Clara rushed forward, clawing to free him, but Jonah's trembling hand pressed against her chest, stopping her. "Clara, run," he gasped, tears brimming in his eyes. "Let me end this." Her scream cracked the silence, but the wires twisted tighter, dragging Jonah into the core of the machine. With the last breath of his strength, he raised the rod and drove it down. The gear split apart with a thunderous crack. Light flared, then died. Silence swallowed the chamber. The puppets collapsed where they stood, strings cut, lifeless. Harlan's body crumbled with them, torn to rusted wire and rotted bone. Clara fell to her knees. Before her lay only shattered metal and a smear of blood, the last trace of Jonah. He had been consumed by the machine he destroyed. Beyond the asylum walls, dawn broke at last. Pale light crept through shattered windows, but in Clara's eyes it reflected nothing but a hollow void. The memory of Jonah and the shriek of steel wires would haunt her forever, like a play that refused to end, its curtain never falling. And PC. It was already 10 o'clock at night. Nurse Mira was making her rounds in the old psychiatric hospital. This was her first night shift in this eerie building. While walking down the dimly lit corridor, she reached room number 13. Mira slowly placed her hand on the rusty doorknob. Inside lay a 22-year-old woman. A pale but strikingly beautiful girl sat on the bed, facing the cracked wall. Her lips moved slowly, whispering words no one could understand. The strange stillness inside the room made Mira's chest tighten. Her legs hesitated at the threshold, as if something unseen was pulling her back. She had heard stories of unusual patients here, some violent, some completely lost in their own worlds. But this was different. It was her first night here. The ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of the wind scraping against the window frames made the corridor feel even colder. Mira gripped her flashlight, wondering if she should step in. Gathering a bit of courage, Mira finally pushed the door open wider. The moment she stepped inside, the girl suddenly let out a chilling laugh and began twisting her body in unnatural ways. She was still facing the wall, but her neck turned all the way around to look at Mira. Cold sweat dripped from Mira's forehead. Her hands trembled as she backed away. Slamming the door shut, she ran down the corridor to the reception, calling for another nurse. Nurse Lena was at the desk, speaking on the phone. "Yes, madam. Don't worry. She's safe. We're taking good care of her," Lena assured someone before hanging up. Seeing Mira's pale face, Lena frowned. "What happened, Mira? Why do you look so terrified?" Mira stammered and recounted everything she had just seen. Lena nodded slowly. "Oh, room number 13. That's Aisha. Her mother calls every night, sometimes every few minutes, to ask about her. They admitted her here 2 months ago and never came back." Mira's curiosity burned through her fear. What happened to her? How did she end up like this? Lena sighed and began to explain. Aisha was 22, a top student in her final year of architecture. Everyone admired her beauty and intelligence, but she lived in a dream world of her own making. She believed she would meet a mysterious artist, her soulmate, and rejected every suitor her parents brought home. She wrote about him in her journal every night, filling page with fantasies. Her parents thought it was harmless. Lena continued. One night, Aisha left her journal at the university library. A young man named Arav, one of her new classmates, found it and took it. He read every page, learning all her secrets and fantasies. The next day, he came to class wearing exactly the clothes she had described for her dream man. Aisha was drawn to him instantly. She forgot about the missing journal, believing she had finally met the man. Their relationship turned intense, even obsessive. Arav isolated her from her friends, especially from Rohan, her best friend who had loved her in silence. He began writing her name in blood, sending letters smeared with it, whispering strange things about destiny. Aisha became frightened, but she couldn't escape. One evening, when she visited Arav's apartment, she found her missing journal there, along with photos of several women. As she stared in shock, a middle-aged man entered the room. Don't be afraid. I'm Prakash, Arav's uncle. He's been unwell since his parents died. He collects things he finds beautiful. People, objects, anything. He doesn't understand emotions. If something he treasures breaks or disappoints him, he destroys it. Aisha is shocked to hear that he's battling illness. She goes over and asks, "What did you say, mentally ill?" Arav's uncle says yes. Aisha's heart stopped when she saw one of the photos, her own face pinned on the wall among other girls. The truth hit her. She ran out, shaking, and locked herself in her room for days, ignoring Arav's endless calls. Hearing this, Aisha was completely shaken to the core. Showing the photos lying in the drawer to her uncle, she asks, "Whose photos are these?" Uncle says, "These are pictures of Arav's first girlfriend. I've met all of them. I've only met her once. Every time I'd see a new girl with him. I don't know what happened to her. I never asked his anything because the doctor had told me not to talk to Arav about anything that might anger him. Otherwise, he might do anything in a fit of rage." Aisha was looking at those photos. Although all of them had one thing in common. All the girls in those pictures were extremely beautiful. There was another photo on that door. Picked up the photo with her trembling hands and began to look at it. Aisha's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of that photo. The photo wasn't anyone else's, but it was her own. Seeing her photo on that door, Aisha felt goosebumps all over her body. Slowly, Aisha began to understand everything. Aisha couldn't bear it anymore. She ran home and closed the door of her room and sat in a corner. She wanted to scream loudly, but no sound came from her mouth. I couldn't get out. She was just standing there when her phone started ringing. It was Arav calling. 101 rings. Even after Aisha didn't pick up the phone, she no longer had the courage to talk to him. Many days passed. Aisha didn't go to college. She didn't meet anyone, nor did she talk to anyone. She just closed the door to her room. She sat alone, staring at her diary. Today, for the first time, she started hating her diary. A week later, the newspaper carried a grim headline. Young man jumps from building after girl rejects him. Araf's photograph stared back at her from the front page. From that day on, Aisha stopped speaking. She sat in her room for hours, whispering to the walls, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Mira shivered as Lena's story ended. The flickering hospital lights dimmed and then went out completely. The corridor fell into darkness. Mira fumbled for her phone. "Lena, are you here?" she whispered. But there was no answer. On the desk lay a hastily scribbled note. "Emergency call. Had to leave. Back in an hour." Mira's heart thudded in her chest. She turned slowly and saw a shadow moving in the corner of the corridor. A tall figure stepped out, smiling crookedly, his eyes glinting like cold steel. "You're beautiful too," he whispered. "Beautiful things belong only to me." He began to laugh, low at first, then louder and louder, echoing down the hallway. Mira froze where she stood. There was a huge difference between the world of dreams and the world of reality. Sometimes that difference can kill.